And that'll serve as a good reminder that we are recording this session. So let's just keep professional in everything that we say and talk about. If something pops up that we don't want recorded, we can buff that out on the backside or choose not to share it. Here's our schedule for today. We'll be brief up front and then we'll pass it over to Dr. Carl Ohlson. So just a reminder, from this point in the year, a lot of professional teams are digging for information. It could be the NFL, it could be other teams that are going through drafts right now. Just protect your information. It could be hard data, it could just be opinion, but just be wary of anybody that may be walking through the facility or even having a phone call with you. Big push right now as teams especially finish the season on coach health. And just like we talked about 2 weeks ago, that could be just taking care of your skin under the sun and the heat, wearing a hat, sunscreen, sunglasses. It could be managing your schedule, finding key times for all of us essentially to manage some time away, to stack days of, periods of time of work. And then maybe the following day is a little bit lighter, but it just allows us to kind of stay healthy. And then we have these two people. And then, obviously prioritizing some time with family. This is a wonderful time to do that as well. At this point too, many of us are going through evaluations. They could be through Penn State and the HR. It could be just programmatic program inside of the program evaluations. We would encourage everybody, just like we do within the high performance model, to get everybody to be a part of that process, gain feedback, gain information, and then really deep dive study your program. Everybody can be a part of that decision-making process. Then the final thing would be with our recordings. Reminder, everything we do in Performance School is recorded. Just for ease of use now and for sharing, what we've been doing is just uploading them onto the YouTube account that we have. And it just allows us to quickly share via text or email. But we'll send these out after each subsequent conversation. But if you want to find any of them at any time, they are listed on the Performance Science YouTube link. Okay, just a reminder also that this is our professional learning community, and it's rooted in a concept called communities of practice, shared knowledge, shared goals, shared community. And we want to maintain that in anybody that we bring in within our coaching staffs, within our faculty that may be a part of this, maybe even some of our athletes that may join us at a certain time and point. Right now, we've gone through some really neat conversations this semester. Like I mentioned a minute ago, we're lucky to have Carl Ohlson from Performance Psychology today. In the coming weeks, we'll have Nicole DeFerrari from CAPS, and then we have Mitch Gerber with our final one in the middle of May. So I will also throw out a reminder as well that our sports performance team will host our annual sports performance summit, and that will take place on Tuesday, Wednesday, May 25th and 26th. It's a split afternoon session. There'll be 4 sessions in the afternoon on Tuesday and then 4 sessions on Wednesday. So we will continue to send out some reminders there. But with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Carl Ohlson. Carl, thank you so much for leading this discussion today, and thank everybody for being with us today. Carl, you got it.
Thanks, Nelly. I appreciate it. And just as a heads up to everybody, this is going to be a little bit different. As Nelly just said, I'm going to lead a discussion, but I'm not going to present necessarily. So this is going to be a lot of audience participation day. And I understand that for folks that are like needing to eat and do other things, whatever, that's fine. But I'm going to be looking for multiple people to do some sharing here. And I can promise you the questions that I'm asking, there's no right or wrong answer. It's a matter of kind of meeting you where you are. I'm going to be taking some notes on there. My hope and intent is to link some theory to your lived experiences. And at the end of this, you can let me know if that worked or not. So let's start with, and again, want a couple of brave souls to share with me and us the best coaching experiences you can remember. And I'm talking about like being coached. So when you're playing on a team, or if it's been a long time, you want to go into just more generally leadership in an organization, that's fine too. But specifically looking at great moments that you remember being coached why, and what you took away from that. Okay, so that's the first prompt. So who's my first brave soul that can share a lived experience?
I got one for you, Dr. O.
Hit it, Jeff.
I was just a young pup. I was a freshman in college, and it actually, you're talking about leadership and everything else. It came from a senior, and it was a practice session, fall basketball practice. And the senior kind of brought me, we had teams we divvied up and everything else. And he brought me in right before we started, and he said, "Hey, you're exactly what we need for this team. This was just our little 3-on-3 team." He brought me in, and I was probably nervous and scared and overmatched and everything else, but he gave me the confidence to do the one or two things that I could do because they were all more talented, more skilled. But he gave me confidence. He told me what was going to be expected, what they needed me to do. And I was able to kind of visualize, I was able to know what they asked of me. And then when it happened, it was very simple. And did I do it all the time? No. But he put me in a situation where I was confident. I know what was expected, and kind of made me a better player than I was because of how he saw it, how he interjected me into the group and validated that I belong there. And it was one of the biggest and best things for me because I didn't have the confidence to do that as an 18-year-old.
So how does that influence the way you coach now?
Trying to make sure, I think when we have kids, for the most part, just speaking of our softball players, when they screw up or when something happens, they know they've made that mistake. They're already there. They're going to be harder on themselves than I can be. Trying to give them that, whether it's 30 seconds, whether it's 5 minutes, whatever the next opportunity I have, give them time to process what it was, and kind of always start my conversations with, okay, what happened? So they can not only talk back through what went wrong, but what was right and why they were thinking it and how they made these decisions. Because so often for us, it's, they have that 15 seconds before the play happens. Did they think through all the scenarios, or at least most of them, before that play happened? Because there's going to be opportunities where we have to react and everything else. But the more that they can have that visualization and understand what their role is in their job, it's easier to perform when you've already kind of thought through it.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Jeff. And your story is great, and the way you're applying things now is great. And I was actually hoping you were going to be in this because I was going to reference a coaching moment that I saw from you over in Haluba, where you did exactly what you just described. So you're absolutely walking the talk, which is awesome. A couple of things I want to highlight before we move on. So just somebody else, please be on deck. But the idea that at this level, athletes know when they've made a mistake. They may not know what caused it, but they're aware of it. So shifting an attention to a solution is a great technique. Saying good job when they know it wasn't a good job, not so good, right? They'll dismiss that because they know better. So the more specific you can get, the better. And one of my mentors uses a 3-question sequence that we've used here a fair number of times as well. The what, so what, and now what? Like, what happened objectively? So what does that mean? And now what? What's the response? Where can we grow a little bit in there? So awesome start, Jeff. Thank you. Next, brave volunteer.
I'm jumping in before anyone else unmutes. I do have to say, I'm super pumped right now because Abby Carr, you guys can see her name, is on this phone call, and I coached her at Bellefonte. So Abby, I'm calling you out. At some point, you're going to have to talk. And I know your professor and maybe advisors on here. Somehow I know that, but so just be prepared, and I will be on you. Sorry if you're not supposed to, but now I just called you out. So anyways. I would say best coaching experience. I know this could also be awkward, but it was, for me, it would be a teammate, and I wasn't the best at conditioning at all, and where I felt like I was completely failing and dying. She was like, "No, you're good. Like, come back on the line. We can get you through this." And I think that was even for like colleague level, having someone have the ability to just keep you going. It was Ree. So that's kind of awkward. I also married her. But I would say that it was just having that person believe that you can keep going and having that positive feedback in it, and something that you're not good at was the best coaching.
So, and how does that influence the way that you operate these days?
Well, I would say that I'm super supportive when our team is running and having their hardest challenge days. So anything that they're uncomfortable with, kind of just making sure that we
Yeah, look at the chat there. That's
yeah.
what Dee does, and she does it for everybody.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Thanks for answering.
And it's not surprising that you would have an example from Ree, because anybody who's been fortunate enough to watch Ree train or condition a team, it's pretty special. And she gets more out of people than many could. So that's an awesome second one. Let me see if I can get one more positive story.
I've got something, I think, if I heard the question originally. Can you hear me?
Yes, Tim, we can. So,
Yeah. Are you asking for a personal experience as an athlete or a
Yes.
coaching experience?
an experience where you were being coached.
Well, it goes back to my high school days when I had a coach that was extremely demanding. Now, I know that he cared, because when he had to cut people, I could see the pain in his eyes in letting kids go that he cared for. He didn't always necessarily show that, but the way he challenged me, and sometimes relentlessly, left an indelible mark on me in terms of that people need to be challenged. Now, it can be in a variety of different ways, but I was able to bring out more of myself in terms of my skills that I never necessarily dreamed possible. So that left a mark in terms of the way I coach. I'm looking for opportunities to challenge people, and sometimes in a rigorous manner. Now, I know I always circle back to make sure they understood what I said or why I said it. And if need be, I'll circle back 1 or 2 times after that so they understand it wasn't personal. But I look for those moments. And sometimes they're uncomfortable, but I just think they're a necessary part of the growth process.
Yeah, no doubt growth is uncomfortable. And Tim and I have had an opportunity over several years now to be able to talk about that, the necessity of being direct. And that one of the things that allows to do this, and sometimes athletes don't remember this, and sometimes coaches don't remember this, but coaches have generally been where the athletes are, but the athletes have generally never been where the coaches are. Coaches can forget where the athletes are, and athletes can forget that those coaches, they didn't just arrive and be anointed as experts. They grew up and, they had their own challenges and so forth, but coaches will generally see more potential in somebody than the individual themselves might see. And that's where that being demanding and caring at the same time can be really helpful. So let's switch the script a little bit and ask for a couple of volunteers to share a negative coaching experience where you looked at that moment of being coached and said, well, that's something I'll never do. Gavin, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to relate back to an experience I had at a competition in Kansas City, where I was doing for all of you listening, I'm a fencing athlete. The experience I had was one where I was fencing against a very high-ranked fencer and doing very well, but every time I messed up, the coach would, instead of saying what I should be doing or what to take away in the moment, he just said, "Boy, why you do this?" Or like, "Why you so stupid?" And just, it's not the type of emotion you want in the moment, and was really just the wrong way to go about addressing the issue.
So what did you take away from that influences kind of how you operate now? Since you're still in the athlete role, I won't ask about coaching, but rather like, how does it just influence your day?
So it influences me the type of role models I look for in coaches. They're just an example of a negative role model. Yeah, in just the ways in which, look, in certain situations, that type of coaching would work well, but it's just a negative role model and negative experience to show me which type of people I should look forward to work with.
There you go. And that's an example of moving towards the solution. Here's what I do want to have. Bob.
I was going to say mine mirrors Gavin a little bit. It's the idea that a coach who was reacting rather than coaching in that moment. And mine comes in high school football, and it stayed with me for 35 years after that. But my best friend is killing me. We had 2 running plays. I'm playing offensive line. He knows the play. He knows the play we ran the play before. He knows the one we're going to run after, and he's now cheating. He's running on the inside gap that we have, and it's 90 degrees, and I'm too hot, tired, and flummoxed to figure out what the heck am I doing. And instead of yelling at me over why you're making him look like an All-American, he could have simply said to me, "All right, Bolin, what are you looking at? What are you seeing? He's cutting the inside gap every time. Sometimes players will do that to you in a game. What do you do to that? Well, you take a parallel step instead of going where you think he's going to be, go where he's going to, and then just wash him down the line. You're a better blocker than he is. How do you flatten out? How do you do that?" And that has been the thing that has stayed with me from coaching and teaching. It is the hardest thing in the world. It's very hard for a coach to coach and not react. I mean, my coach was mad at me. He wanted me to be better, but he didn't know how to coach me in that moment. And I think that is the obligation of all of us who coach and teach to break it down and not react, to ask those questions you did.
Yeah, 100%. And so, and to be clear as well, there's a difference between reacting and responding. So generally a reaction is a split second, knee jerk, largely emotional, and a response may be measured and paced and have a deep breath in there as a transition and so forth. So everything that we've shared so far lines up really nicely with the research. I'm going to jump into the research in just a moment, but I also wanted to see, anybody have an idea of why I wanted to start this conversation this particular way with your lived experiences first?
I would guess it's to give us a kind of a platform to be a little introspective and maybe one of the things that drives us the most and the way we coach.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd always like to basically meet you where you are first, and then we're going to go on a walk together through some ideas, and for you to be introspective as well, and recognize that you have lived experiences that are shaping. We learn a lot from the experiences that we didn't like, and we learn a lot from experiences that we did like. I'm going to share with you some concepts that come out of an instrument that was developed many years ago called the Coaching Behavior Assessment System, and CBAS. And a lot of information is available on that. I'm happy to catch up with anybody individually. There's also a lot of other coaching education systems out there. The reason I like this one is because, well, first, generally in the research, we know that coaches oftentimes are unaware of their own behaviors. They many times are aware of their personalities, but not necessarily their behaviors in a moment, right? And we also know from the research that coaching behavior has statistically significant influences on athlete psychological profile, affecting self-esteem, satisfaction, perceived confidence, perceived competence, things like that. So the way in which the coach-athlete behavior interaction plays out does have this influence. Now, it may have more of an influence at the youth sport level, certainly throughout high school, but it does have an influence at the college level as well. So this CBAS instrument was designed as a way to observe coaches in the natural habitat. And you're basically marking off behaviors and copying down specific language and coding them against a bunch of different possibilities here. But the reason why it's so important in that natural habitat is any coaching situation, it has at least three things. You got a coach, you got an athlete, and you got an environment. And all of that is influencing how the conversation goes, whether it's good or whether it's not good. So being able to identify coaching behaviors in real time is super helpful. Now, this particular instrument, and I'm going to show it to you in a moment. I'm going to share my screen, show you a diagram. Not going to ask you to memorize that at all. Happy to send it out to anybody afterwards, but just as a kind of a reference point as we go forward. It's basically got 12 behavior categories. 8 of them are, the authors labeled it reactive. I might change that to responsive if I was part of the authors, but I'm not. So we go with reactive. And 4, spontaneous. So a reactive response is something you're responding to a performance or effort, right? Mistakes and errors, and behavior and misbehavior. The spontaneous, I would relabel that as proactive. That's the things when you roll in with a plan, like you're going to instruct, you're going to announce, you're going to communicate, whatever, at the beginning of something before anything happens. So we got these 2 different types of behaviors. Let me give this a shot here, and I'm going to try to share my screen. And can everybody see this diagram?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome, thank you. So this is the way it breaks out. And as you go through, you're looking at positive reinforcement and non-reinforcement. Positive reinforcement obviously is you're praising if something specific that has happened. Non-reinforcement is there's no communication at all. Something good happens, but you don't say anything. The mistakes and errors piece, this is actually probably the most important part of this whole process here, because mistake contingent encouragement, basically somebody makes a mistake and you're just pumping them up, lifting them up and encouraging them. Mistake contingent technical instruction means somebody did something wrong and you have the solution and you're coaching the solution, right? And then obviously there's punishment and punitive instruction. That's, you're getting the instruction, but you're getting yelled at the whole time. And then ignoring mistakes. So a lack of a response to mistakes is a response in by itself. And then the misbehaviors piece is keeping things under control. The spontaneous, as you see, that's the more general stuff. Okay, I'm going to coach you up. We're doing an install. We're, general encouragement, organization, etc. So think about all of the experiences that we just heard about so far. We heard about, lifting up, being specific, being demanding, but caring, challenging, on the positive side. On the negative side, we got the criticism, we got the name calling, we got the yelling, we got the dismissiveness. All of this fits nicely within what we have here. So I'm going to, again, just think about general terms. You don't have to mimic this or get it verbatim, but I'm going to stop sharing because I want to see more smiling faces. And based on what you heard from your colleagues here today so far and what you just saw on that chart, what do you think athletes prefer in being coached? And let's look at, at least high school level, specifically the college level. What do athletes want?
I would say encouragement and like attention. So consistently giving feedback.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Any other thoughts on what?
Would it be some kind of combination of multiple versions of what was presented, right? Just dependent on the situation, the athlete, the scenario, how they learn, how they receive feedback and respond.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've some subset of this call, we've had these conversations of individual differences. And one of the reasons you get to know the people you're coaching is because it allows you to push the buttons in the best way possible most out of somebody. Some athletes respond very well to a very assertive conversation. Some that backs them down and then they can't think straight. So knowing your individuals first, and then the combination of supporting and being specific. Here's some of the things that come out of the research. Generally, regardless of age group, many athletes prefer coaches who are both supportive and instructional. Right? That makes sense. It's what we just said. Also generally prefer, when you look at the list that I had shown you, things like mistake contingent technical instruction. That's actually a plus. The fact that athletes want instruction in response to a mistake. They like general technical instruction as well. They do like reinforcement. They like to know when they're doing something well. And they're pretty good with the mistake contingent encouragement. Then when you get to the D1 level and studies that are specifically looking at both males and females at the level we operate, it's pretty similar, but there's a little bit of difference in it. They like the reinforcement. They like the mistake contingent technical instruction. They like the general technical instruction. They're not so excited about the mistake contingent encouragement. I mean, it's there, it shows up, they appreciate it, but they don't appreciate it to the same level as knowing what's the solution, how do I fix this, right? And the one thing that gets added in here is a coach that can keep control. Generally at this level, athletes don't like it when they have teammates that are misbehaving, and they want accountability. Also, not so much if they're the one being held accountable, but that's a little bit of a different story. But generally, elite athletes want accountability. The least preferred is non-reinforcement. They don't want you to overlook stuff, ignoring mistakes, the punitive technical instruction and punishment. Generally, people don't like punishment. Punishment does not typically enhance behavior. It's very reactive, and there's usually a better way if we focus on the solution. Not saying there shouldn't be consequences for decisions and actions, but that's something to take into consideration. There are better solutions than punishment. The best news to me coming out of the research there is that generally athletes at this level want to be better, and if you're the person that can make them better, they will listen. There are exceptions. We talked about this before. People at this level don't want fluff. They don't want you to pretend they're good at something that they need to get better at. From a performance psych perspective, you can speak things into existence. The language you use influences what you see next. So we learned about this 2 weeks ago, the way you cue things and everything. If you focus on what you don't want or keep harping on the mistake itself, you're not going to see improvement. If you focus on the solution to the mistake, you're going to see more improvement. With instruction, take a look at who's doing most of the talking in a team meeting, right? We're looking for learning and we're looking for investment, and that means the athlete holding their own in the conversation. So this is the last thing that I'm going to present, and I'm going to just open it up for questions. We talk a lot with our coaches about the idea of, like, when you're doing a film session, periodically ask the athletes questions. What did you see? That tells you if you're picking up the right cues. What does it mean? That gives you an indicator of their sport specific IQ. And then what do you do? Like, do they really understand how they're supposed to respond to a cue in the environment? Those are examples of 3 questions that you can ask. And as long as you don't blow them up for a wrong answer, it works really well because you get a chance to see the world through their eyes. And again, remember, you've been where they are. They haven't been where you are. You got to go back and reconnect to where they are. From the athlete's side, asking questions for clarification, confirmation, or elaboration. I'm not sure I get it, so I'm going to ask a question. I think I get it, and I'm going to ask to make sure that I got it. And then the elaboration piece, that's the and then some. And some of our athletes are quite good at that. I understand what you're saying, and now I want to learn even more. Okay. So those are the things I wanted to make sure that I connected. I left some stuff out because you all already covered it. I want to try to tie this all together. And I promise you all of this can be very effective in leading organizations as well as coaching teams. So with that, I'd love to open the floor up for questions. I recognize that we're close to 12:30. Anybody who has to jump off, that's fine. And anybody who wants to stay on and have a conversation, that's fine too.
I have a question.
Shoot.
So you mentioned in the D1 level, am I good?
Yes.
The not being so excited about having feedback from a mistake versus, I guess, high school. So clear.
They're not as excited about the encouragement piece. Like, they make a mistake and you're like, that's okay, you'll get it next time. That's okay. They'd rather have the solution generally. And again, this is statistical. So that means there's a bunch of folks that don't fall into that bucket as well. And that's the individual differences thing. Just know that at a higher level, you can coach people with more specifics.
Okay, so then say, because I'm thinking softball only. So the sport is very, like, I'm thinking about hitting and they can't get timing right. So you're doing the exact opposite, like an extreme mistake. Like, you know that they would never swing that early. So you're trying to bring them back into the middle, I guess is what I would say. So you would want it, like, that's where it conflicts, right? The encouragement of doing something so wrong to get back.
I think you can definitely use the encouragement. Some of this is the tone that you use with it. So it's more like if you're going to have somebody do something, you want to come across as you believe they can do it, and you want to speak belief into them that they can do it as well. Some of what you're talking about in terms of overcorrection, like this is a very common thing in golf, right? Where you, if you're hooking a shot, you intentionally see if you can hook it even more, because what it does is it gives you back control, and then you just calibrate yourself back into where you need to be. So part of it is from a motor learning perspective, and part of it is from a regaining control of a situation. You can certainly be encouraging in there, include the why we're doing this particular drill and how it's going to play out. Does that make sense? Any other questions?
Yes. You touched on it briefly, but one thing you said was that coaches are often aware of their personality, but not necessarily their behavior. What is the best way to, obviously you have to be kind of introspective and look at yourself honestly, but what's the best way to become more aware of your behavior while you're coaching? Because it's usually a spur of the moment and you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about the situation.
No, that's an awesome question, Adam. There's probably not a one size fits all answer to that. However, something that I really love, and it has happened here more times than I ever thought it would, is when a coach comes to somebody who's like outside of the food chain, like myself or Adriana or Nelly or somebody, and says, hey, follow me around and just watch me and see where can I get better. And I was stunned the first time one of our head coaches said, hey, I want you to give me feedback on how can I be more effective, because that opens up the world. That kind of vulnerability allows for so much. Now, if you're paranoid, you're not going to ever ask that question, right? But if you're vulnerable and you have a growth mindset, you may very well ask that question and get feedback from somebody who's not in your shoes. Another thing that I've seen, one of my colleagues does this, and he with athletes, he'll say, you know, what's it like to be coached by me? And for the athlete side, he'll turn around. It's like, well, how does it go? Wait, what is it like to be coached by me? And then what is it like to coach you as the athlete? And so if you have a good relationship coach athlete wise, you can have that conversation of, what is this dynamic like anyway? Because we want it to be an elite dynamic. And oftentimes by building the relationship, you can get authentic feedback that you otherwise wouldn't get. So that would be two different approaches.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or ideas or whatever? Also critiques and criticisms, they're good too.
I have a question.
Yes.
This is Coach Miller at Greater Allegheny women's basketball. So I'm one of those types of coaches where I like to try to get ahead of things before they happen, right? And I've found in the past that when you do have athletes who bring a little bit of baggage with them from where they're coming from that maybe you couldn't prepare for, you didn't know about prior to them showing up, kind of hits you kind of fast, So, my approach in recruiting has been a little bit different to make sure I'm trying to bring in young ladies who are not bringing a lot of that baggage. But what would you recommend, you adding to your program to try to minimize those things that,
Yeah, I wish I had a perfect answer to that, because that's the kind of stuff that pops up all the time. And you think about when you're recruiting, especially when you're recruiting people out of high school, they ain't done growing up yet. And so you don't necessarily, they don't even necessarily know what they're getting ready to behave like or experience and so forth. And we can get surprised there. I do think one area that's really important is focusing on team culture and what the individual roles in that team culture building is. There are ways we do this regularly with some of our teams where we're facilitating in a workshop environment what our team culture, our desired team culture is going to be, where the sticking points are going to be, what are some of the things that could chip away at our culture if we're not careful, and then how do we safeguard the culture? So that takes a little while of unpacking, but it's one of those things where everybody has to participate, because then you can hold them accountable to something they participated in. Otherwise, you're just basically looking for compliance if you give them the culture. right? So pulling them in. But then the other thing is like, all of that is super hard to do until you've built relationships. And we hit on this a lot, but we don't talk about relationships so we can exchange greeting cards. We're talking about authentic relationships so we can speak truth to each other, and connect with each other and help each other and do life together. And there's not a one of us that has a moment where we didn't need help from somebody else, but you don't reach out to those that you don't trust. Right.
Yeah.
So that up front, that is super, super important. It takes patience and persistence. Sometimes with an upbringing coming in, they may not feel safe opening up about some shared experiences. So sometimes, and some staffs are big enough to do this, but I'll encourage the coach to say, like, who has the best relationship on the team with that individual? Because that's going to be your point of entry, as long as that person is coming from a place that's going to be helpful. So sometimes an assistant coach or a director of ops or even a faculty partner or somebody tangential to the program may have a real enough relationship to connect with an athlete and start helping in ways that, if you face it, if you are in charge of playing time, roster slot lineups, depending on sport, whatever, it's going to be a little harder for you to have that initial connection with some athletes. So I don't know if that helps at all.
That helped tremendously. For me, just to sum this up, I'm making a transition from military for 20 years, where there's such a huge culture of leadership, esprit de corps, all those great things that work, but you have the resources available to you. So then when you coach at this level, you have a difficult time being able to reach those resources because it's just you, and then you have 15 to 20 young ladies who are just all needing your time. So that kind of gives me a better idea, of how to approach it preseason before, I start running into issues, because every year you have them.
Yep. Awesome. And that's awesome. That I actually was going to mention this and then I forgot, but I spent 30 years in the Army before I came into this job.
Cool.
What you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. And you and I both know how authentic relationships allow special units to do special things. It's not the movies. And so we've been trying to share that as much as possible.
Definitely. Thank you.
You bet.
As an athlete trainer, the student athletes come to athlete training room, before, after practice, or even, between the classes. And it is nice to listen to some conversation in that. And sometimes that information help me sometimes to talk to coach or whatever. And I think that is, I love, the in the college athletics and environment. They're talented, they work hard, but also how it can help, some issues in small things, but they can be big. And I have learned a lot from the student athletes, just talking, listening what they're talking. And if there's something that is negative about, the coach or practice or something like that, then that kind of helped me to actually bring up sometimes. I did. Not offensively, obviously. It's not my business to coach the team, but just as a supporting cast, I learned a lot from that, aspect. Just casual conversation, what they respond, face impression. Just walking the train room, the entrance, just watch. She walks in. You can tell from that, behavior and then what's happening, perhaps, whole team. So it's kind of off the topic, but just
No, but it's still,
cast.
This is an idea that supporting cast is, it's a huge, potentially good thing. And that's where in coaching, and unfortunately, you're part of the educational process for these athletic trainers, which is awesome. And share those lived experiences, because the athletic trainer could be invaluable in these types of situations. They know athletes in ways that nobody else does. It's also the necessity there, and this is for any support staff, of having the maturity and judgment to know how to share, when not to share, potentially how to connect some dots, and then provide an observation versus a quote from an athlete, because you don't want to violate that relationship. I think some of our teams that have really strong we'll call it high performance team or, whatever. We have different labels that we put on that, but collecting resources around the table, some of those conversations have been game changers. We just got to be careful in any of those situations that we don't become part of a rumor mill. That's just a warning, a cautionary note for anybody who's involved with athletes, obviously. So that's an awesome share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Always happy to field questions or ideas, suggestions, and again, feedback after the fact. Nelly, I'll kick it back to you.
Well, man, I really appreciate it. And Carl, this is, I know everybody on this call would say the same, but every time you talk, it's gold. And really appreciate you taking time to lead this discussion. Everybody, we will turn this into a YouTube video and we'll disseminate this so we have it for our records. And if there's any follow-up, please, I would encourage everybody to reach out to different people that either asked questions that are on this screen, to Carl, to myself, anybody, but let's continue to make this learning community grow. Next, in 2 weeks, we will have Nicole DeFerrari from CAPS here at University Park campus talking, and we look forward to having everybody there. Please bring a friend. And always enjoy your lunch. This is very informal, so you can hop on and off, whatever you need to do. But Carl, thank you so much, brother.
You bet.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, Coach O.
Thank you.